Hear how you can create content using your authentic voice with my guest, copywriter Ashleigh Rennie, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. You are going to love my conversation today with copywriter Ashleigh Rennie. We have such a wide-ranging discussion, everything from how she grew up to what she does now as a copywriter, and specifically for you is how to use your authentic voice in the content that you create. So in your business, in your brand, in your copy, in your marketing, in your emails, and in your presentations. I hear this a lot from clients is that they want to be more conversational in their writing. They want to bring more of themselves into what they do, including in their speaking and presentations, but they're not quite sure how to do that. Ashleigh is a genius at this as a copywriter, and so we get into that. And you can find Ashleigh on her website, which is www.thestoryteam.org. Let me tell you a little bit about Ashleigh, and I'm just going to quote what she wrote in the podcast interview form when she initially scheduled it. So here's what she said. When I was growing up in South Africa, the country was in the darkest days of the Apartheid. It was the 1980s. Nelson Mandela had been in jail for 20 years. We were on the verge of a civil war. My parents were liberals who voted for democracy, and I was making speeches at school about social injustice, equality, and marginalisation, and why apartheid was wrong. Then I went to work for a nonprofit, the Foundation for Tolerance Education, and I held workshops and made speeches about apartheid, the Holocaust, and what it means to be a victim, a perpetrator, and a bystander. I'm passionate about being vocal about what you believe in. It's everything to me. It's a huge part of my business and my work as a copywriter. For me, it's feminism, human rights, animal rights, Black Lives Matter, issues of privilege. I want my clients to find their voice and be unapologetic about putting it out there. But I also want my own voice to resonate with people, end quote. So when I read that, I just could not wait to interview Ashleigh and really talk about everything from her growing up in South Africa under apartheid, how those early experiences influenced what she does now. And then again, this idea of how to bring yourself, your authentic voice into the content that you're creating. And I know that for a lot of the clients that we work with, a lot of the women that we work with, and a lot of you who listen to the podcast and I hear from is that you feel a little bit hesitant and uncertain about bringing things that may be like more of a political nature into the work that you do, into the content that you do. But I will tell you that I have seen the dramatic benefit of doing so because I feel like when I do so, I'm a role model for others, for you to do it as well. And that creates a greater connection between me and the audience, between me and our clients. And it's the same thing that Ashleigh has experienced. And because Ashleigh is so upfront and vocal about her beliefs, it actually drew me to her even more and vice versa, her to me. And so she is working right now on revamping the sales page for our Thought Leader Academy to really punch up the copy on it. And because I had done it originally and it's fine, but I am not a trained copywriter at all. And so she is working on that right now. When this episode airs, it's about the third week of July. And so if you want to go to the page, you can see the before version, which is the current version. That's at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. And then by September 1st, the new and improved version will be there that Ashleigh will have worked on. And so you can see it there. And while you're there, you can get on the interest list for our Thought Leader Academy. Enrollment will be opening in September, and it's a max of 12 women entrepreneurs that we have in the academy. You get both one-on-one coaching and the weekly group calls. It is an incredible experience. Women who have gone through it have said it is the best coaching experience they've had as an entrepreneur to really help you find and use your authentic voice to understand what your thought leadership message is and to create your signature talk. And so while Ashleigh and I were chatting about her updating the copy on the Thought Leader Academy page, she mentioned that she had Googled to find who were the greatest public speakers in history, because she was doing some initial research for me for this page. And she found a couple of websites, and she said that the sites that she found, there were some lists that had no women speakers on them at all male speakers. And then some websites that maybe had a few female speakers on them, but mostly male speakers. So while we were on our Zoom call the other day, I Googled it as well. And we were just like laughing, but the laughing with tears, because it's so incredulous that they put lists together with no women on them. So here's a post from bigthink.com, which is a pretty big site. Like, they have lots of blog posts that they do. So they have 7 of the greatest public speakers in history. So here's who they list: Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, Socrates, Martin Luther King Jr., James Baldwin, and Mr. Rogers. And there's one more. So again, all valid men to include on the list. Definitely fantastic public speakers. As you notice, there is no women on the list. But you know who else made the list? Adolf Hitler. Yes, they would rather put Adolf Hitler on the list than include any women on their list. So frustrating. And we wonder why. We have problems with women in power and positions of influence and visibility is because we keep replicating this idea that women are not at the forefront of history, are not at the forefront of change. So here's another list, which is much better. This is from the Washington Speakers Bureau, and I'll include these links in the show notes. They have some of the great actual speeches themselves. So they have FDR's inaugural address. They include Maya Angelou's address at President Bill Clinton's first inauguration. They have Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, Winston Churchill's on here, and so on. But they also include Harvey Milk, Muhammad Ali, Nelson Mandela, Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Malala Yousafzai's address to the United Nations, Dolores Huerta, who was for labor rights, for workers' rights. So much more balanced list. So it is possible to create a balanced list. And that's really why we did our Choosing Women's Voices Challenge last March of 2020, was for all of us to be more intentional and conscious about choosing women's voices, making sure we're quoting women when we use quotes in our presentations or articles that we write, and make sure we're also consuming content, books, podcasts, articles, journalists, etc., by women. All right, so now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the podcast, Ashleigh.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I am so excited to have you on. We have so many juicy things to dig into today. And we met through Natalie Sisson, who has a podcast called Untapped. I was on her podcast earlier this year, and then she came on the Speaking Your Brand podcast, and I participated in the summit that she held. And so you do copywriting work for her. And we connected, I think, through LinkedIn from that, and kind of just got to know each other through LinkedIn comments. And then I realized that your background is so fascinating to me, not just as a copywriter, but growing up in South Africa, that I knew I had to have you on the podcast to talk more about that. So Ashleigh, before we dig into all of those details, can you tell us a little bit about the copywriting work that you do, and then we'll get into how you decided that's what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Sure. So firstly, thank you so much for having me. You're right. I actually, the first time I heard you was when you did Natalie's podcast, and I was like, this is very cool, which doesn't happen to me very often. So it was really, really exciting to find a podcast that I enjoyed. The copywriting that I do is I work for Natalie, but I have a whole bunch of other clients. So I run a company called The Story Team, and I provide copy mostly for female entrepreneurs, mostly in the coaching space, but also, I've written copy for law firms and accounting firms and whatever comes my way, which I completely love. And I think the kind of copy that I love the most is direct response copy. So I love writing emails. I think it's the most fun ever because I really enjoy writing to that one person, like that one person in the inbox who's going to read the email and laugh or have a good day or whatever it is. So so that's kind of the stuff that I do. And then I also love sales pages and websites and all the juicy things as well. Yeah.
I have a feeling there are so many listeners right now who are like, number one, I wish I was like Ashleigh, that I loved writing emails and sales pages. And number two, how can I hire Ashleigh?
It's weird because it's scary. It's like initially it's quite a scary thing to sit down and to take on a sales page is really, it's a lot, but It's great. I think once you understand what it needs, and once you understand the client's voice, which is so huge, and once you know who you're speaking to, it's fun. It can be a lot of fun. Words are brilliant. Words are fun. I love them, and I love playing with them. So just do it. Just enjoy it. Just have fun. I think that's the main thing. I think when you're having fun with your writing, people feel that, and they respond.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, so Ashleigh, I said as I was introducing you that, how did you end up deciding you wanted to be a copywriter for your job when you grew up? Did you, looking back to when you were younger, I assume like you loved to read, you loved words, did you understand that there's such a thing as a copywriter existed, or how did you end up coming into this industry?
I didn't know when I was a kid what copywriting was. I knew what advertising was, and I knew that advertising was really interesting to me. And I loved English growing up. Like, just English class was my favorite, and it was the subject I excelled at. I did the best at English, and I just knew that I loved words and I loved language. And then I fell in love with Shakespeare really young, like, I probably when I was about 13 or 14. And I started writing creatively, actually. So I was writing radio plays, and I was writing for, much more drama, sort of drama-filled stuff. And then my sister started her own PR company, and she asked me to write her copy, and I did. And that's sort of how I got into it. And from there, it kind of just exploded, into other clients and other people. And I've been doing it for about 15 years, and I love it. And I think what's really exciting about running my own business now is that I get to work with people all over the world. Natalie's in New Zealand, and a couple of my clients are in the States. So it's really just allowed me to have this really remarkable experience with people all over the world.
I love that, Ashleigh. And so, I have said in this podcast before and at our summit that, Hamilton the musical is one of my favorites because it's such just a creative art of genius. But I'm like, you know what? I want like the women's equivalent of Hamilton. And so perhaps I have found my writing partner.
I never thought that. I saw Hamilton a few years ago. Those opening moments where you sort of realize what you're in for in terms of the language and the style of music. My whole body was electrified. And I've never thought of that, actually, but you're totally right. We need a woman's version, like the great female speakers or liberators of, history. Come on, we should do it. I'm in. I'll do anything.
Okay,
seriously.
Great. So I am not musical at all. And so I don't know if you are, Ashleigh. If not, we'll have to find a third person to help us with that.
We'll find someone. Okay. Don't worry. There's plenty of people.
All right, great. That's going to be our project. All right. Totally. So let's go back in time a little bit. And so you grew up in South Africa, and you said when you kind of wrote what we wanted to talk about today, you said that you grew up in the darkest days of apartheid during the 1980s when Nelson Mandela had been in jail for 20 years at that point. The country was on the verge of a civil war. So tell me about kind of like that experience growing up. What did you think at the time, and how do you think that has impacted kind of what you care about now and even the work that you do now?
It's an interesting question because I think when you're growing up, or certainly when I was growing up at that time, I don't think I really understood what was happening. So in the 80s, I wasn't even 10 years old yet. I was really young. I think I was really lucky in the sense that I had incredibly liberal parents, and they were very committed, I think, to teaching me and my sisters about what was happening in the country and why it was important. One of my earliest memories is actually of Nelson Mandela coming out of jail. Like I think I was in my room. I don't know what I was doing. I was playing, and my mom came to me and she said, something is happening on television and you have to come and watch it. And I was 8, and I was like, what? Anyway, I did. I watched it and I remember it. I remember it clearly. I think when you grow up in a country that is sort of that fractious and has that kind of history to it, you only really start to understand what that meant when you grow older and when you start to understand your privilege and your position in the country and your position in the social structures of the country you grew up in. But I certainly felt very strongly from a young age, about equal rights and about, treating people with respect and treating people equally. I was definitely brought up to believe in equality and, that apartheid was wrong and evil. I think that stayed with me throughout my life. I believe that everyone is equal. I believe that, and I don't just believe in equality, I believe in equity, which is a whole other conversation and is quite complicated. And I think that in terms of my work, I really try and take on work and take on clients that are in that same space as me, in that same belief space, in that same ethics space. I think it's really important for me to do good work. And I think it's really important that even in copywriting, even in this industry, we are conscious of that stuff and we are aware of it and we are talking about it all the time. The world has changed. Hey, like they're aware of stuff. And I think that's, for me, it's really important that my clients are aware of that stuff as well. And that some of the work they're doing is having a positive impact in the world. That's really, really important to me.
And I believe that you have the word feminist in your LinkedIn profile headline. I remember seeing that. And, I've done episodes on this podcast about feminism and then when Black Lives Matter, when that kind of resurged last summer and talking about the work of anti-racism as white women in, the role that we can play in that. And so for you to put the word feminist in your LinkedIn profile headline, like, I love it. But there's so many people out there, entrepreneurs, and who would think that would kind of just bring about so much controversy, loss of clients, things like that. So how, like, obviously we're probably on the other side of that, but do you hear that from people, and what is your response to that?
I haven't struggled with my feminism because I've never hidden it, but I've had to learn how to manage it, and I've had to learn how to, which battles are worth fighting and which are not, because it can make you sick, right? And eventually my husband just said to me the one day, like, you have to calm down because this is going to make you sick, and so I thought, okay, so how do I hold that part of myself and put it out there, in a way that is respectful and in a way that is not going to make me ill. And I was like, I just say I'm a feminist. I put it in my LinkedIn bio. I think that will attract the kind of person that I want to work with. And if anyone is afraid of that or is worried about that, then you're probably not my client. Also, why are we so afraid of that word? If you believe in equal rights for women, you are a feminist.
Exactly.
Sorry for you. Welcome to the sisterhood. We embrace you. It's really as simple as that. So there's a lot of negative connotations around it, and I find that really interesting. But for me, that's what feminism is. It is the belief that women are equal, that women are equal to men.
Right. It seems like a pretty simple concept that people should be able to agree with, and yet we see what happens to that.
Totally. Yeah.
I have a sense that, the childhood you had, growing up in a country like South Africa that had apartheid, people, including your parents, it sounds like, had to live their values. They had to act on their values, not just think about them or not just kind of like hold them. Okay, like I have these values, but I don't have to do anything with them. Do you kind of get a sense now as an adult, like that thread where you seem to be like such an outspoken advocate for these different issues is because of that childhood upbringing that you had?
I think so. I certainly remember specifically my mother just being really not hardcore about that stuff, but certainly saying, this stuff is important. Your beliefs are important. Standing up for what you believe in is important. I'm not perfect at it. Like, I think I've certainly seen things happen around me where I haven't spoken out or I haven't said anything. And then I feel really, really bad about myself. And I don't like feeling that way. So I definitely think that the country I was brought up in and the things that were going on around me have had a huge impact on who I am today and what I believe in. And also because in South Africa, once apartheid was over and we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there was so much dialogue, and there still is, around what happened. Like, I'm not sure that any other country, maybe Rwanda, has had that kind of dialogue around injustice and race and like heinous atrocities that have been perpetrated against vast number of people. And, so in South Africa, we are incredibly vocal about that stuff, which is wonderful because it's allowed us to tackle it, and it's allowed us to talk about it, and it's allowed us to, be angry and to feel guilty and to apologize. And, we're still not through it. We're young. We're a young democracy, and it's going to take a really long time. But I think that having to grow up in a country where that stuff is talked about and discussed, and, your friends are the children of people who were persecuted and violated, that stuff is in your everyday, existence. And so you live it. And I definitely think it's a huge part of who I am today. Absolutely.
Yeah. And thinking about the Truth and Reconciliation work that South Africa has done, and then how much, we mentioned earlier about how much words can have an impact. Language can have an impact. The words that are chosen can have an impact, and being able to say things out loud, and having people to be able to speak, and then have them be able to be heard and listened to. And then I contrast that here in the United States with, the recent attack we had on our US Capitol in January, and then how Truth and Reconciliation equivalent is clearly not going to be happening here in this country. Yet we need it so badly, but people just don't want to talk about uncomfortable subjects. And I think it's somewhat a level of emotional immaturity. And then obviously also a lot of it related to privilege, and people not wanting to they would not call it privilege, of course, people who don't want to talk about it, but that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was fascinating. And it was incredibly healing as well, I think. And again, I speak as a white woman, not ever having experienced apartheid or, the injustices that were perpetrated under that government. But I think it created a common history for our country. And I think it created, that testimony that was heard by victims, survivors, but also by perpetrators, allowed for a common history to be built. And no one, you can't look back and go, oh, but did it really happen? Or because there are so many people who spoke about it and spoke about the things that they did to other people. And words are incredibly powerful. And I think that there are some countries in the world that could learn a lot from it, from that kind of, it's like a purging, right? It's therapy. And therapy is incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
not always easy.
Oh,
right?
No. It's terrible. I've been in therapy, it's hard. There's some stuff you don't want to talk about, but also I don't know. I think it's different for everyone. And I think every country is different. And I think it largely comes from the leadership, as well. So certainly in our country, because the ANC were voted into power and Nelson Mandela was president, and, that happened, and it had to happen. And it wasn't a cure-all. It didn't fix everything. And the country's still incredibly broken, but, it did go a long way to help people grieve and heal.
Mm-hmm. And such a great point, Ashleigh, you made about the language and the words providing a shared history. Mm-hmm. And I think about back, when I was studying history, that I think was Benedict Anderson was the academic. And he said that, nation states get created out of a shared imagination, a shared history, because you're bringing, groups of people together with artificial borders or artificial, states and country lines and things like that. But you have to give them a shared imagination, a shared history in order to bond them together. And I just, think about here in the US, I think that is what we are missing going forward, and what has caused so much of the polarization and fracturing that we've had over the past number of years is that we are completely diverging on this idea of shared imaginations.
Yeah. It's really tough. And if I look back at my own just at my own schooling, where the history we were taught, particularly when I was really young, because once I got into high school, we were learning about apartheid and we were learning about the history of South African politics, which was great. But before that, when I was in primary school, we were learning the white man's history. That's not a shared history. That's one side. And history is very complicated, I'm sure, and I'm sure you know this because who is writing the history?
Exactly.
When you start to really dig into that and delve into that, it gets quite nasty, hey, because there are so many stories that are not being told, and that's really dangerous.
Exactly. Well, and that's a great segue, Ashleigh, into our mission of Speaking Your Brand, of course, is to amplify and champion diverse women's voices and stories, because we know how important it is to have their stories and their voices and their visibility and representation out there. So, we help so many of our clients with finding and using their voice. So many of them, they enjoy public speaking, they do presentations, they do trainings, they do workshops to teach strategies and to teach the things that they know for their area of expertise in their business. And then, of course, we encourage them to go a little bit further, push them a little bit out of their comfort zone and dig deeper into their voice, into what is that deeper message, that deeper story that they can share with their audience that is going to provide that deeper level of connection. So as a copywriter, how do you help your clients find this more, we can call it authentic voice or more meaningful voice? And then for yourself, how have you done that?
I'm really, really obsessed with authentic voice. It's one of the things that I think has been given me the most joy in starting my own business. When you're a copywriter and you work for an agency or you work for a company, you write what they tell you to write, and you don't really have a lot of freedom to play with the voice, right? And so what I love about the work that I do is working with women specifically and helping them find this voice that is in there. And a lot of them have it already, which is completely wonderful. And then you can just grab it and run, and you can write great stuff. But sometimes we're afraid, I think I was afraid for many years to let my voice come out. And I think the older you get and the more experiences you have and the more you sort of establish yourself, you start to lose that fear. So I think for people who are, writing copy and who are maybe writing their own copy or who are working with a copywriter, it's the thing it's that voice that you have that your friends love. It's that voice you have when you're sitting over coffee with your best friends and you make them laugh, or you say something that gets them going, or you get in your zone. That's your voice. And that's really hard to find when you have to write an email or a sales page or a website. But, so for example, if I was sitting with you saying, let's write a sales page for a launch you were doing or a summit or whatever, I would say to you, okay, Carol, when you get really excited, what do you say? What's your go-to phrase? How do we bring this out? And so you would need to feel really relaxed with me, and that would be my job, to make you feel relaxed and to have a cool vibe, between us. And then to find those things that are you, those little phrases and those little bits of magic that only you have. And I think that's the key to really, really great copywriting, is to make it sound completely like you, which is tough. That's hard, because sometimes we don't know what our own voices are yet, and we have to figure that out. And so that's I suppose where our friends and family can come in, and we can chat to them and say, when you think of me, what do you think of? And then for myself, I had a really interesting experience about 2 weeks ago. So I write my own copy and I write my own content, and I've been so focused on putting content out that's really valuable. So 5 ways to find your ideal client, or the top 3 tips for writing a website, or whatever, and that content has its place. And I'd written a blog about money mindset, because I've had to work really hard on my money mindset. The blog, I have a weekly blog, and it was due to go out on the Wednesday. And the night before it was due to go out, I had a really nasty experience on a train. And I came home and I wrote about it. I just sat down It wasn't very long, but it took me like 30 minutes to write, and I wrote it out, and that was the blog. And I slept on it, and I went to it the next morning, and I just tweaked it a little bit and made sure there were no errors or whatever, and I published it. I promise you, people were like, because it was such a real experience that had happened to me. And of all the things that I'd written, it was, I think, the most valuable, because people came to me and said, how do I write like that? How do I write like that? And I was like, you have to write what moves you. You have to write the thing that scares you, actually, because I was nervous. I was nervous to publish that blog. I thought it was too personal. And it's been a really interesting experience, because then, the following week I wrote another semi-personal one, and people liked that as well. So it's about writing stuff where I think you have to push yourself a little bit into territory that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Because that's the stuff that cuts through the noise, right? It's so noisy out there. It's crazy. So yeah, I think those would be my tips, is to write stuff that scares you, and to find your most true voice and write in that voice. I think that's really powerful. And to speak that way as well, right? In terms of the work that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ashleigh, I love that. And I'm going to go find a link to that blog post. So I'll include it in the show notes for listeners so that they can read that.
Oh, okay. I'll send it to you. Okay, cool. I'll
to give
email
them
it
a
to
sense
you.
of what you're talking about. And I 100% agree with you. Whenever I put out a podcast episode or an email newsletter or a LinkedIn post where it is just me telling a story, it's almost like a moment in time story. And I think a lot of us have gotten, we've lost this storytelling ability, even though I tell like our clients all the time when they're working on their stories for their talks. Imagine you're sitting down at lunch with a girlfriend of yours, and you're talking about some event that happened, some situation that happened. You're going to use dialogue. You're going to describe maybe what the person was wearing or where you were. It's like, take that conversation that you would have with that girlfriend and just put it now into your content. And I think we forget, like we have like this like siloed wall between like, that's my personal life and that's how I like talk to people. And then I have my business side. And it's like, no, bring that stuff over into your business side.
Exactly. I think also because we're taught, I don't know if we're taught this at school or at university or whatever, that, when you're writing, now you've got to be professional. And yes, of course, you have to be professional. But like sometimes actually, like, I think I threw an F-bomb into that blog as well. I was just like, because, I was so stirred. I was so touched by what had happened but I was like, in this moment, that is real for me, and so I think sometimes we've been told to play it a bit too safe, and that, as you say, our personal life sits here and our business sits here. But actually, like, I am my business, right? I don't have any employees. It is just me. And so if I want people to say, hey, I really like this work and I really like this writing, I have to bring myself to that. Otherwise, it's just words on a page, and that doesn't move people,
Yeah. And then you're interchangeable with every other copywriter who's out there. If the only kind of posts you're doing are, here's 3 things that you need on your website copy, or, then it's like, okay, so Ashleigh can write this, very tactical blog post, but so can 100 other copywriters out there.
And that's a great skill to have. Like, no one is saying don't have that skill, and no one is saying don't put out content like that, because I think it has its place and it's super valuable, and I'm not sure that this particular blog that I'm speaking of, I'm not sure that I could write a blog like that every week and sustain what happened, right? Because it's also, that would just be too much on the other side. But I definitely think it's about striking a balance between the two. And in the posts that are, the 3 tips to SEO optimize your blog post or whatever, just bring a little bit of you to that. Just, even if it's just a little, I don't know, even if it's just sort of a bit of slang that you use, or, whatever. I mean, it could be anything, just the rhythm in which you speak. It could be a whole bunch of different things, just so that it doesn't sound like anyone could have written this, because then you're not memorable, right? And you want to be memorable. I think.
Oh,
I
for
do.
sure. For sure. And also, so then, right. So people are attracted to you, they're attracted to your content, they're attracted to working with you, as speakers and as thought leaders, putting our own original content out there is so incredibly important to help differentiate ourselves. And I know, from having done this podcast for almost 4.5 years now, weekly episodes plus the email newsletters that go along with it, my voice is so much sharper and more refined now than it was 4 years ago. But it's that weekly practice that has gotten me to this point. It's almost like having a writing practice or whatever it is, because if it's only in your head and it only comes out once every 6 months, you're probably not going to be able to refine your voice as much as if you do something consistently.
Exactly. And I think that's so key, because I think this doesn't just happen. It's something you practice, right? It's something that you refine. And so, sometimes I'll put out content that just doesn't land. And then I'll be like, okay, that didn't land. And then I have to look at why or why not. And that's a great lesson as well, because sometimes you think something's good. Like I wrote a blog about, because I've just started hot yoga, which I'm completely in love with. And I was like, I'm going to write a blog about why content creation is like hot yoga. And I put together this really, like, I thought it was so smart. Like, people, no one read it.
You just never know, right?
They were like, no one was interested. I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe hot yoga is not that exciting, So I mean, so what you're saying is totally true. I think, like, you've had this podcast, as you say, for 4.5 years, and I think you can hear your voice. Your voice is so defined, and it's so you, and it's so present and clear, and that's because you've had this time to do that. And I think people have to give themselves time to play, because it can be a really playful, lovely experience, and play is really important, really important.
Yes. And being willing to experiment, which is along with that.
And being willing to fail,
Mm-hmm.
just have it not work. It's okay. Like, it's not that important.
Yes.
you know?
That's why I love having a weekly podcast and weekly email newsletter, because it gives me, like, every week, I'm like, okay, so that one didn't get as many opens or clicks as the other one. Oh, well, next week I get to try again. And the next week I get to go again. And so versus feeling like you have to create something perfect, put it out into the world. That's the only thing you create for the next year.
No. And some stuff, I think everything you create will be valuable to someone. And that's also something to remember. I think we've become so obsessed with, like, getting the click rates and getting the open rates and getting 1,000 or 5,000 people to read the blog. But actually, maybe 2 people read the blog and go, wow, that really meant something, or I learned something. And that's amazing as well. That's great. So I think everything you put out, so long as you put it out with awareness and a kindness, because people are consuming that stuff, and people are reading it and listening to it, and it's, as long as it's not hurtful, just put it out there, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the copywriting aspect here, because you had mentioned to me that people will fall in love with you if you're a little bit in love with yourself. You as like the entrepreneur, the content creator, the writer, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
So tell us about what exactly does that mean, and how does that show up in our writing?
That's a complicated thing, because I think we've been taught that being in love with yourself is not allowed, especially as women. And actually, that's not true. I think that when you are a little bit in love with yourself, that's sort of, when you look in the mirror and, like, you are wearing the most fly, like my Russian red. Am I allowed to advertise on here? My Russian red. This is my favorite lipstick in the world, right? And when I put that on, I just look at myself and I'm like, man, you are amazing. It's a feeling, right? It's a feeling. And I think that when you feel that, you are just more open. And I think so in your interactions with people, you are more open and you make them feel better. So I think that's how it manifests just in daily interactions. In terms of writing, I think that when you write from your heart and you write from a place that feels really good, that is the writing that has the most effect on people. And sometimes it can be funny. So like, I think my website's a little bit outrageous, and I don't know, I say my business partner is my dog, like I'm the story team, and it's me and my dog, we're the story team. And, she's featured there on my website. She's a huge part of my business. I think that people go, oh, that's either they go, oh, I don't like that. And that's fine. Or they go, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to hear more and I want to see more. And I think it's just that feeling of being a little bit in love with yourself is just knowing where you sit and knowing what you believe in, where you sit in the world, and taking that space and just owning it. And it's a really hard concept to explain in words because it's a feeling, but we've all felt it. We've all felt it. When you've been in a meeting and you've made a great suggestion and people think it's amazing, and or you go out and you're wearing a great pair of heels and you just feel like the bomb, or whatever it is, we've all felt that feeling of just sitting in our space going, yeah, I'm good with this. And we need to try and write from that space as well, which is really tough. It can be really tough, especially when you have a deadline.
Put on the red lipstick first.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And then look in the mirror. And then write.
I am amazing. And then write that sales page. Yeah.
No, but so Ashleigh, and what I'm thinking of when you're describing this is like, and when you show up confidently in front of your audience, whether it's speaking, writing your email newsletter, social media, what have you, your audience isn't attracted to you because that energy is contagious. And and it doesn't mean being like, you don't have to be positive all the time. You don't have to put up a facade all the time that things are perfect. It's not about that, but it's about having like this confidence and presence and groundedness in yourself that you're showing up as you are, with and the things that go on, and if you do that, I think about the entrepreneurs that I follow, and when you're right. They love themselves, not in like a narcissistic way where like it's not about them being better or thinking that they're superior to others. It's that they have this confidence in themselves, who they are, the work that they do, the mission that they have in their business. And when you see that come out on their content, you naturally want to follow them, and then you're inspired by them.
I think something else that's really powerful is that sometimes we just don't feel okay. We just don't feel like confidence is also about getting up in front of your audience, whether it's on a live or on a story or on a reel on Instagram, and just saying, hey guys, I'm really struggling with this today. Like, what do you think? I think that makes you human. I think it makes people relate to you. I think it makes people want to engage with you more. So confidence for me isn't about like, I am amazing and I can do anything. It is about those moments as well of going, I think I messed up, or I feel scared, or I don't know what I'm doing, or whatever, whatever it is. I think it's just about being authentic in that moment. I think that's what confidence means to me. I also follow entrepreneurs on Instagram, and I do sometimes think, oh, I wish I had it together like they do, It's also important to know that they're also human. They're also we're all figuring it out, right? We're all trying to just get through things and figure stuff out. It's life. It's tough.
Yes. And I must say that whenever I have done a podcast episode where I have revealed more things like vulnerabilities, which is definitely not my go-to, but whenever I have done that, I have had listeners and clients so appreciative of that. And they have said to me, and I take this to heart, Carol, you seem like not perfect, but you seem to have everything together. And so when you do one of those episodes to show like definitely not, like that is so far from it, because we all have our messes behind the scenes. But when I do that, I'm actually end up being more relatable. And they want to work with me and work with Speaking Your Brand more, not less. And I think a lot of, especially women out there, feel like if they are vulnerable or share things that are not perfect, that people will think, oh, they're not expert enough, or they're not with it enough or together enough to work with. But I have found it's the opposite.
Absolutely. Because I think, we're human and we crave affirmation, and we're incredibly vulnerable beings. And I think that when you show that side of yourself, it does make people go, oh, okay, it's like, I'm okay. She's not perfect either. And that's good.
Yes, yes.
You know,
And then they know they don't have to show up perfect to
yeah.
me either. And I don't want them to show up as
But
perfect.
also perfection is boring, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's just boring. Like I want to see I want to, and I think like you speak about Hamilton, like I love theater and I love art so much because it is so imperfect and some of it is so raw and so like gut wrenching, that for me is where connection is. And I think if we want to bring it back to the entrepreneurial world, like you make sales when you connect. That's the bottom line, right? Sales is connecting, it's conversing, it's showing people who you are, it's allowing them to not be afraid of who they are. That's what sales is. It's connection. So yeah, we must not be perfect. Perfect's not, I don't like it.
Well, and okay, so and one more point about this perfection. So in the Hamilton the musical, Aaron Burr, his arc throughout that play, the musical, is he is far from perfect. And, he has all of his imperfections, his jealousy, his backstabbing, all of that. But that's what makes him, to me, the most fascinating character, more fascinating than Alexander Hamilton, precisely because of his imperfections.
Yeah, it's like the witch in the fairy tales, right? We vilify these women, but it's just because they're complicated and they're a little bit dark. They are the best. They are the ultimate. We all love the villain. We all love the complicated character because we see our own vulnerability in them, and our own missteps and the mistakes we make. And that's real life. That's real life, Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Ashleigh, what an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for being willing to dig into these topics with me. Where can listeners find you, your website, and where's your favorite place to hang out online?
My website is thestoryteam.org, www.thestoryteam.org. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me, Ashleigh Rennie, on LinkedIn. And then I'm mostly on Instagram, I would say. So my Instagram handle is @thestoryteamldn for London.
Fantastic. Well, I will make sure to include those links in the show notes so that everyone can grab them there and connect with you. Ashleigh, thank you so much for coming on the Speaking Your Brand podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Thanks again to Ashleigh for coming on the podcast and for having this fantastic conversation with me. Don't forget to check her out at www.thestoryteam.org. And you can also get on the interest list for our Thought Leader Academy, which enrollment will be opening in September. You can do that by going to speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Until next time, thanks for listening.